Biscuits. Now that's a fine way to start things, Navin. So I'm Mazin, and I shall be doing the Meiji restoration, the focusing on how Imperial Japan was born. Now initially I was planning to do the entire history of Imperial Japan, but well, things happened. I realized it was too big, so I started off with this. Now, if we want to know how exactly the Meiji restoration took place, the place to start would be with this guy, Commodore Matthew C. Perry. Now this guy, he arrived in Japan in 1853, docks near the entrance of Tokyo Bay, and he has only one simple mission: to deliver a letter from President Willard Fillmore to the shogunate. Now the shogunate just told him one thing: get out. Because now the Tokugawa shogunate, ever since it came into power back in the 1600s, had a policy of seclusion, which they call seppuku, which was that they really didn't want anyone coming into the country or going out unless they really needed to. So now Matthew C. Perry was determined to give his letter. So now he ordered his 3 steamships, which are all black hulled, to fire on the buildings near the port. Now these ships outlast everything in the Japanese military at the time, literally everything, and they wreaked massive havoc on the port. So the Japanese decided to surrender and said, okay, look, we'll take your letter. So Matthew C. Perry gave his letter and left. Now these ships, the black hull ships, the term black, they had an effect on Japanese society, because black ships, this term was initially referred to merchant ships that used to arrive in Japan. Now they would come to symbolize the threat of Western technology. So now a year later,
The effect was that huge.
Huh?
The effect was that huge.
The effect was that huge. So now Matthew C. Perry came back a year later in March, actually in February, now with a larger fleet. So he stayed in Japan, and then in March he signed the Kanagawa Convention. Now this was a very huge treaty, because this opened the Japanese ports of Shimoda and Hakodate to American trade. It essentially ended the 200-year policy of seclusion. Now fast forward down the line, with Japan being open to more the Western powers, it ended up having to sign a few treaties called the unequal treaties. Now these treaties, this term unequal treaties, apply to a series of treaties that all the Eastern powers, China, Korea, Japan, signed with the Western powers, because they were, in a sense, literally unequal. Now you had the Eastern guys giving more, and the Western guys literally giving nothing. So this essentially made the Eastern nations feel they were pretty much semi-colonies. Now eventually, of course, this led to widespread resentments. Eventually the reigning emperor, Emperor Kome, had issued this edict, which is called Expel the Barbarians. Now around the time in Japan, from the 1850s and 1860s, there was a philosophical movement which was called Sonno-joi, which was essentially translated to revere the emperor, expel the barbarians. So
Warhammer.
pretty much.
It's also in James Clavell's Asian Saga. It was set during this period.
Nice.
So the Sonno-joi movement eventually culminated in this edict, but since it was made by the emperor, it meant jack. Literally, because the emperor at this time was not a ruling figurehead at all. He was just literally there, a figurehead, that's it, a paper figurehead. He had no real power. All the power lied with the Tokugawa shogunate. Now the shogunate had no plans to enforce this whatsoever. However, the thing is, it inspired attacks against foreigners in Japan and the shogunate. Now the most prominent example would be the Battle of the Shimonoseki Straits. Now here, of course, the moment after this edict was issued, the leader of the Choshu domain, Lord Mori, ordered all his forces to attack on any foreign ships that would travel along this strait known as the Shimonoseki Strait. Now this would culminate into literally a one-year war with the Choshu clan and the Western powers. Not the shogunate as a whole, because the Choshu clan, of course, literally said no to the shogunate, which was not really trying to enforce this at all. So the shogunate branded the Choshu clan as rebels. Now fast forward, now the Choshu forces decided, okay, we are going to rebel against the shogunate as well, because like I said, Sonojoy, it inspired attacks against the shogunate as well. Now, then the Choshu clan did something known as the Kinmon incident. They essentially openly rebelled against the shogunate by trying to take over the imperial palace in Kyoto, where the emperor was residing. However, of course, things didn't go according to plan. They set fire to the city, tried to take it over, but they were defeated by shogunate forces and from the forces of the Aizu and their rivals, the Satsuma domain. Now this would be slightly interesting later on. Now, fast forward a year, in September 6, 1864, after a full year of diplomatic negotiations, no battles, pretty much just straight out negotiations, the joint naval forces from Great Britain, France, the Netherlands, and the United States literally decided we're going to bombard these guys. So now still at this time, the Western powers outclassed the Japanese. So they were literally no match. So this Choshu forces surrendered. Now after this, reparations of $30 million was requested from the shogunate.
It's a lot of money.
That's especially a lot of money when you consider this was in 1860.
Yeah.
So it's not adjusted with inflation, it's just the amount they demanded
Pretty
at the
much.
time.
So given inflation.
Yeah. Now
That's like asking for Donald Trump.
pretty much.
So,
now obviously the shogunate wasn't able to pay this. So the Western powers used this to force them to sign more unequal treaties, opening up more ports, setting up more consulates, etc. Now another incident I'd like to mention, of course, with Sonojoy was the Namagumi incident. Now this is slightly debatable, of course, because now the whole account has been debated as to whether the incident was by Sonojoy. However, now this incident was when a group of samurai from the Satsuma domain decided to kill a British national called Robert Lennox. Now he was a businessman, of course, but now the accounts vary as to whether he was killed because of Sonojoy or because he was just being an arrogant traveler. Because now he was actually, as he was traveling, he passed the procession of the diamond. Yes, he did refuse to bow. However, because of the one of the unequal treaties, the foreigners were exempt from bowing. So now instead, of course, some accounts say he was just riding along the road on his horse like a maniac. And interestingly, when his uncle learned about his death, he was like, I'm not surprised, he was an arrogant traveler.
So, quick question, why did they try to interfere in the bombardments? I'm still not sure about why did the Western powers do that?
Because the Shimonoseki Strait was a major point of trade with Japan.
Oh, right. So they just want to trade. So they basically
exactly. They just wanted to trade.
Commodore Perry, his bombardment was basically trying to get Japan to open their markets.
Yes.
Because they were there and they weren't trade ones. So his letter was like, I want you to open business with you.
But then what was so special about Japan that...
They make cool stuff. China and stuff like that. I mean, it's all valuable.
And we also understand that the heads of the Japanese, the people involved in making decisions, refused to see the foreigners. You would have to go through dignitaries.
Exactly.
And at the time, the Japanese did not value the concept of time.
No, I get that.
Yeah, but see, now that's an
That's
interesting
why
point
it
to
was such a
bring
shock.
up.
It was also culture shock because suddenly these foreign barbarians can demonstrate massive military superiority, and you can't hide this from anyone.
Exactly.
It's kind of like North Korea
That's what the
then.
black ships did.
It's like if North Korea got bombarded tomorrow by a US aircraft carrier, they can never go back up.
Exactly.
Or Kim Jong-un lost a game of golf on...
or if they watch the YouTube.
Yeah.
So,
So you go
now he made an interesting point about how the shogunate would avoid foreigners, because now see, when you come back to the Kanagawa Convention, now interestingly, when Matthew C. Perry signed this convention, he thought he was dealing with representatives of the shogunate, But in reality, it wasn't. It was the shogun himself. Now that itself was huge in Japan. Now when you come back to...
So there's no, do you have to know the rationale between having an unequal treaty rather than a simple equal one if they wanted to?
Because why would you be nice people who can screw them? This is the thing.
See,
This is
like
19th century colonialism. They didn't even think it was wrong. They had like covered up.
No, Manifest Destiny was around the time, right? Or a bit earlier.
Manifest Destiny was
1700?
convenient, right? Because you're, oh look, we just keep going this way to the west.
Exactly.
Plus when they were attacked by the Satsumas and they demanded reparations, the shogun had telling for a long time said, you know what, this is not a problem. These are the Satsumas. They're an entirely different clan. Why
Actually, that applies to the Satsuma as well, because now, as I said, with the Namagumi incident, now the British themselves also asked for reparations. However, the Satsuma said, no, we're not going to do it. So now they faced the Royal Navy. Now, eventually, of course, the Satsuma domain borrowed money from the shogunate, which incidentally they never paid back, and gave it to the British. Now, after this, of course, the interesting thing was that they realized, okay, we need Western tech. So the Satsuma domain decided to open up trade with the British to get their weapons. Now, this will be an interesting point, because now, after the Shimonoseki Straits bombardment, the shogunate decided to launch the first Choshu expedition. This was literally a military campaign to crush the Choshu clan. However, it ended without a single drop of blood being shed because of this guy. This is Saigo Takamori, one of the leaders of the Satsuma clan. Now, the Satsuma clan, he and Satsuma clan proposed, okay, look, they said, you take the leaders of the Kimon incident, who were basically who caused the Kimon incident in the first place, and just punish them. Don't punish the entire clan. Now this is interesting because, like I said, Satsuma and Shoshu were rivals. But see, the Satsuma leaders realized, okay, now with us getting Western tech, and now the Shoshu clan being put down, first it'll be the Choshu clan being put down, then it'll be us. So they decided,
in India.
Exactly. So decided, okay, just calm down. We got this. Now, fast forward to 1866. The Satsuma...
Hang on, could you go into a bit more detail when you said they calmed down and said they got this?
Yeah, so basically when they got the... They basically got the instigators of the Kimon incident and had them executed. Then that was it. So then of course...
And that quelled the whole problem, like...
Not exactly. Pretty much for a while.
But it was customary saying...
Well, I mean, the fact that you said there was a first Choshu expedition makes me believe that there is a second one. So.
Yes, there was a second one. That was, of course... Now, they tried to, of course, put down the Choshu clan there, but it failed, of course, now because they found that the Choshu clan had more modern weaponry than the shogunate forces. There, of course, the Satsuma forces were just neutral.
Because it was customary that, let's say, if the samurai missed his lord off, most often is the lord would ask the samurai to commit seppuku, but they would also have precedent to basically punish the family, the son, the entire family, and that was often applied to clans. Some days you have to go the whole
Yes. So now, when you come to 1866, the forces, the Satsuma and the Choshu domains form a military alliance. Their goal is simple: overthrow the Tokugawa shogunate. Now, later, of course, now you have Tokugawa Yoshinobu taking power. Now, he, of course, faced huge pressure, of course, with the Choshu clans, the Western part, the unequal treaties, and everything. He decides, okay, I'm going to step down as shogun. This effectively ends the Tokugawa shogunate, which lasted for 200 years. However, there was, of course, terms and conditions that applied. He was still in charge of a leading governing council. So essentially, picture Maithripala Sirisena saying he's giving up presidency, but he's still in charge of parliament, the army, all that. This is exactly what this guy did. But of course, there was still a power vacuum at the top of the Japanese hierarchy. So, then of course you have the Meiji restoration, which happened on January 3rd.
Oh, what happened to the power vacuum? Was it?
Yeah, this is exactly what happens. So now with the power vacuum in place, the Satsuma and Shoshu forces seized the Imperial Palace in Kyoto. There, of course, Emperor Meiji, when he was 15, this is actually a slightly old image of him, he proclaims the restoration of imperial rule. In other words, he says, I'm in charge now. This is the point where the Empire of Japan is pretty much born.
Do you want to talk a bit about the difference between Japanese empire and Japanese shogunate?
Yes, see, this of course would be like, the shogunate of course was Japan under the shogunate, but however now you have the emperor taking power. So if you look at imperial, history itself.
You want to define what a shogun is? Because not everyone knows what a shogun
Okay,
is.
my bad. So now the shogun of course was pretty much the de facto military dictator of Japan until this point. So he was like the top lord. He would basically be a military it's kind of like they had an alliance, of course. Now Japan at this point was consisting of various domains, each just led by a daimyo or feudal lord. Now these feudal lords, of course, there was an era known as the era of the warring states. They would all battle out against each other to take control of all of Japan. Now towards the end of it, of course, you come to Tokugawa Ieyasu, who was the leader of the Tokugawa clan, basically conquering all of Japan. And he, of course, had all the domains, decided to submit to him. And he became the shogun.
So it's like, he's like the prime minister to Britain's
Pretty much.
queen, yeah?
Before the shogunate came into power, there was the empire. There was an empire.
No, there was no empire.
So how did the emperor come? How did they have an emperor in place?
No, see, you mean, there was no empire, but however there was an emperor.
What basis? How would he call
See,
himself
that
emperor?
of course you have to look into Shintoism, because now see, Japan had an emperor, and which they believe now according to Shintoism was a descendant of the sun goddess Amaterasu.
So it's a religious.
Yeah, see, up to this point, it was all purely religious. Like I said, when the Sonnojoy, the expel the barbarians order was issued, the shogunate decided not to bother with it because he was purely.
So he was a ceremonial figure.
Exactly.
So the shogunate were the guys who really had power completely, but
It's
the
like
emperor
the
was-
British prime minister and the queen. The queen gets the helicopter.
So the shogun was a regent.
Pretty much. But actually, no, the shogun had no responsibility to the emperor at all.
So the shogun was a legitimate power in the eyes of the people,
Exactly.
but the emperor was simply.
The emperor was like a figurehead you would look up to, like a symbol.
So how did the emperor come to be exactly? Just through divine.
Yeah, pretty
I thought the shoguns were divine.
No, see, the
Shoguns
emperor.
are military dictators.
Yeah, shoguns are military dictators.
Right. Okay, I get it.
Strongest guy, there were major clans, right?
Exactly.
The strongest guy was elected shogun to keep the power because
Yeah, because now he of course just until Tokugawa Ieyasu came, they were all of course, like I said, warring with each other. Then Ieyasu came, beat everybody up to control Japan, and decided, okay, he is the strongest guy, we are going to submit to him. That's how it worked. The emperor of course was still there, but he was pretty much just a figurehead because religious.
So didn't that cause if the emperor being, he might not have had military power or anything, but people still looked up to him.
People looked up to him.
So wasn't there a
no, people
rivalry?
don't look up to him because the emperor did not interact with the common people. The shogunate was not just a military arm, but also the filter between the emperor and the people of Japan, because it was believed that the emperor was so holy that you literally could not even look up at his face.
Pretty much.
So the emperor was basically a very religious puppet.
So now of course, like I said, when Tokugawa Yoshinobu resigned, that so-called filter was gone, and there was nobody there. But the structure of course was still there, of course.
Yeah. So if the structure was there and he was still supposedly in charge in the background, this guy Tokugawa.
Yeah. See, now he was not in charge in person. See, they of course now see, technically yes, he was in charge because, like I said, he led the leading council. But however, of course, if you look at the structure now, see, even if like let's say now with our government, Maitripala steps down, but he doesn't abolish the executive presidency. It's not, the presidency is still there, but there's just no one there. So eventually someone will have to fill it up, right?
Yeah.
So that's exactly what this guy was doing at this point.
So was this in defiance of Tokugawa?
Pretty much, it wasn't in defiance technically because Tokugawa wasn't in power anymore, remember? He stepped down.
So the emperor decided to just be an emperor today.
Yeah, he decided, okay, look, there's nobody here, I'm gonna take it. So,
Nobody challenged you.
actually I was gonna come to it.
You're running Ubuntu?
Yeah,
What, dual or just like?
dual. So now now you have the Meiji restoration happening, and the emperor, of course, proclaims he's going to take power. This is where, of course, the point the Empire of Japan is pretty much born. However, of course, now, like you said, Tokugawa Yoshinobu, he decided he's not going to be bound by this. Now he launches a military campaign to capture the emperor's court in Kyoto.
Oh shit, the last samurai.
No, actually, the last samurai would come a
Later.
bit later.
Okay.
That was in the Satsuma rebellion.
Right, sorry.
So now this would spark an event known as the Boshin War. Now the Boshin War, of course,
This is more Samurai X, right?
pretty much it's like two samurai. Now the first battle was the Battle of Tokofushimi. It's where Tokugawa forces and the new Satsuma Choshu forces fought at pretty much Boshimi in Kyoto. Now the interesting thing was, now this battle lasted pretty much for about 4 days. Now on the second day, the emperor issues an order granting the Satsuma Choshu forces to use the Imperial banner. Now this was fairly huge because,
Oh shit.
So is that good?
careful with the phone.
Keep going.
So now this meant that the Satsuma Choshu forces were now representing the emperor himself. They were not just representing another daimyo, they were representing the emperor himself.
Yeah.
So, and Prince Yoshiaki here was chosen to be his commander. Now this had an effect because as the battle raged on, the forces of the shogunate were forced into confusion, disarray, and they were literally demoralized because now they weren't firing on, when they attacked, they weren't attacking another daimyo samurai, they were attacking the emperor's samurai. So they were like wondering, should we do this? And then of course they were eventually using this momentum, the Imperial army decided to push them back. Eventually they arrived at Osaka Castle, where Tokugawa Yoshinobu secretly decided to flee the battle. Now the shogunate forces here were completely demoralized, they just surrendered. Now fast forward to April 7th, and even as the Boshin War was being raged on, the Fire Charter Oath is publicized by the emperor and his various daimyo and Satsuma forces who decide to join with him. Now this, of course, was a series of 5 oaths that they decided would be followed after they took power, which would in effect be the foundation that would modernize Japan. Because after this restoration took place, Japan, of course, would go through widespread, large number of reforms that would reform every single aspect of Japanese society, right down to literally the little details. There are so many, that's why, of course, my presentation was limited to the restoration. So now, when you fast forward a month later afterwards, actually no, a few months more, you have the imperial forces surrounding the capital city of Edo. Now, the shogunate here, of course, they held out for a while. However, on July 4th, they decided, actually no, around May, they decided to surrender unconditionally. However, of course, some shogunate forces decide we're going to resist the order to surrender. They are defeated by the Imperial army on July 4th, 1868 at the Battle of Ueno. At this point, the capital city of Edo is now under complete control. Yes, now?
Why did they even choose to fight? Because if everyone else is uniting behind the emperor's banner, and the shogun himself has fled the last battle, why do they care?
Because of course you still have the whole loyalty thing happening.
People are loyal to the shogunate.
It's all about that,
Yeah,
Japanese culture.
the samurai, of course, they had, their code was that they be honored, you know, they have to obey their master, it's part of the honor. So that's why, of course, some of them decided to fight. However, of course, the shogunate forces never really won a battle in this entire war. So now, on July 4th, 1868, the Battle of Ueno is complete. The capital city of Edo is now under complete control. Most of the daimyos, sensing this, decide to submit loyalty to the emperor. So fast forward to September 3rd, 1868, Emperor Meiji moves his capital to Edo. He renames the city Tokyo. Then of course finally you have the restoration complete, on which is a year later at the end of the Boshin War, which is on June 27th, 1869.
What did the Meiji restoration actually entail?
The restoration itself was about restoring imperial rule.
Right.
Direct administration.
Exactly. Now, of course, as I mentioned earlier, some shogunate forces decided to resist. Now, the shogunate navy, which was fairly intact in the Boshin War, decided to flee up north to modern-day Hokkaido,
Okay.
where they set up their own Republic of Izu. Now, a Republic of Izu.
Well, that's like the modern day the ancient Delhi.
Pretty much. So they literally had a full functioning government and everything. But of course, it's not like the Imperials could actually accept this. So they decided to, of course, after a while, they build up their forces and then they siege Hakodate, and eventually, of course, as the siege ends, the Republic of Izu decides to surrender. They couldn't face the Imperial forces anymore. Interestingly, of course, the Republic of Izu's instigators were pardoned later on and became involved heavily in the reforms the Meiji era followed.
Why do they pardon them? They declared a republic. That's as much of a finger as you can give them.
It was defiance, but interestingly, they were.
Right.
Why?
Well, it makes sense because if you have the talent to set up a functioning republic, and you also, that kind of talent is useful on
You also have the talent to rise up, but there are probably factors in that we don't know about that made them decided.
Sadly, I could not identify why exactly they were pardoned, but one of the reasons was, of course, now the leader of the siege of Hakodate decided to petition, like he submitted a letter asking for clemency.
Okay.
Okay, so makes sense.
Plus,
So-
they must have lost like a lot of people.
No,
The government must have lost a lot of people.
Actually, no, the government always had the upper hand here. This entire war, the government, the Meiji era government, the Imperial army always had the upper hand. They, like ever since the Battle of Toba-Fushimi, which was, right here, the Imperials continued to just advance straight up north and literally defeat the shogunate forces. So now, as I said, with the siege of Hakodate, the Meiji restoration was actually complete. All of Japan was now under imperial rule. Now, following this, of course, you would see a huge series of reforms being passed that would transform every aspect of Japanese society, which would transform this weak nation that was being bullied by Western powers to an actual power. So that concludes my presentation for now. I might do the restorations, actually the Meiji era reforms at the next Salon. So if you guys have any questions at this point, I'm willing to take them.
So, the Meiji, the emperor that came after the Meiji restoration, was it considered a continuation of the imperial dynasty, or?
See, now that was a continuation of the imperial dynasty.
Right.
But of course now, see, Japan of course has this system where each era is defined by how the life of the emperor. So when the Meiji era itself
It's just one emperor.
Yeah, when Emperor Meiji, the guy who took charge here, died, the Meiji era came to an end.
So we're in the Akihito era right now.
Huh?
So we're in the Akihito era right now.
Yes, actually the naming system is slightly complex in itself even.
Okay.
Because now Akihito's era is known as the Heisei era.
Okay.
And even Hirohito, the emperor who reigned during World War II,
That's the era they will not be speaking of.
that's
Don't mention the war.
That is the boom boom era.
that's actually the era that made me actually want to do this. Which is now called the Showa era.
There are photos of that has Nagasaki being bombed, right? That entire area being bombed. There's a photo of an arch still standing.
Ah, that
Okay, it's about to die, just so